I still remember the exact shade of burgundy on Elaine's nails as she pointed them accusingly in my direction. Vanessa would have known better, she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. She always understood what Daniel needed. The room fell silent. My husband shifted uncomfortably beside me, his eyes fixed on the hardwood floor. No one came to my defense, not my father-in-law Robert with his perpetually buried nose in the newspaper, not sister-in-law Olivia who was too busy texting, not even Noah who usually had a joke to break the tension. And certainly not Daniel, the man who had promised to stand by me through anything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It wasn't the first time my mother-in-law had compared me to Daniel's ex, but something about this time felt different, final, like the last thread holding together my place in this family had finally snapped. I'm Rebecca Chen, though everyone calls me Becca. 3 years ago, I married into the Wilson family, a decision that, standing in Elaine's immaculate Lake Oswego living room that Sunday afternoon, I was seriously questioning. I'd come from a modest Chinese-American family in Seattle where loud, honest conversations filled our small apartment, and hugs were given freely. The Wilsons were different. Pristine furniture, measured speech, and affection doled out like precious gems, rarely and with great consideration. I didn't realize the recipe had been passed down for generations, I said, my voice smaller than I intended. The disastrous apple pie, my attempt at contributing to the Wilson family Sunday dinner, sat pathetically on the dining table, its filling too runny, its crust uneven. Vanessa mastered it the first time Robert showed her. Elaine continued, smoothing her already perfect silver bob. She had a natural talent for these things. Magical Vanessa, perfect Vanessa, the ghost who haunted my marriage, Daniel's college, sweetheart who, according to Elaine, would have made a much better addition to the Wilson family than I ever could. Never mind that she and Daniel had broken up years before I met him. Never mind that from whispers I'd caught, she'd actually cheated on him with a coworker. In Elaine's revisionist history, Vanessa was the one who got away, and I was the disappointing substitute. "Mom, please," Daniel finally said, but with such resignation that it hardly qualified as a defense. I placed my hands flat on my thighs, pressing down to keep them from shaking. 3 years of trying to measure up. 3 years of adjusting my clothes, my speech, my cooking, my career choices, constantly molding myself into someone the Wilsons might eventually accept. And for what? To be compared to a woman who had broken her son's heart? "I think it's time we head home," I said, rising from the plush velvet couch that had always made me nervous to sit on. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Oh?" Elaine's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. "With that little hobby business of yours?" "My hobby business. The sustainable clothing brand I'd been building for 2 years, the one I'd poured my savings into, the one that was just starting to gain traction in Portland's eco-conscious fashion scene, the one Daniel had initially supported before his mother's constant dismissals had made him doubt its viability. "Yes, with my business," I said, emphasizing the last word. Elaine exchanged a look with Robert, who had finally emerged from behind. His newspaper. Wouldn't it be better to focus on starting a family? Daniel's not getting any younger. 34 is... "Mom," Daniel interrupted more firmly this time. "We've discussed this. But the damage was done. The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. I was failing as a wife because I was prioritizing my career over giving them grandchildren. Another mark against me in the endless comparison to Vanessa, who had apparently been eager to become a full-time Wilson wife and mother. We gathered our things in uncomfortable silence. As we headed toward the door, Elaine caught Daniel's arm. "Think about what I said," she murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "It's not too late to reconsider your choices." The drive back to our condo in Portland was silent for the first 20 minutes. Rain pelted the windshield, matching my mood. Daniel drove with both hands firmly on the wheel, his jaw tense. "You could have defended me," I finally said. He sighed, that familiar sound of exhaustion I'd come to recognize whenever conflict arose between me and his family. "She didn't mean anything by it. She compared me to your ex-girlfriend, again, in front of everyone." "That's just her way. You know how she gets about traditions. And the comments about my business? About us not having children yet." Daniel's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Can we not do this right now? It's been a long day." It had been a long 3 years, but I bit my tongue. This was our pattern. Elaine would undermine me. Daniel would offer minimal defense, and later, he would downplay his mother's behavior until I questioned whether I was overreacting. Gaslighting through family dynamics, my friend Maya called it. We arrived home to our sleek downtown condo, a place that had never felt fully mine despite my attempts to make it warm. Daniel immediately retreated to his home office, claiming a work emergency. I stood in our kitchen, staring at the Portland skyline through the rain-streaked windows, and something inside me shifted. I was tired, bone-deep, soul-tired of trying to contort myself into someone I could never be, of walking on eggshells in a family that had decided, before they even met me, that I was second best. I pulled out my laptop and opened the spreadsheet I'd been avoiding for weeks. The numbers for my business, Green Thread Apparel, stared back at me. They weren't terrible. In fact, they showed promise. With the right investment and focus, I could take it beyond the hobby stage Elaine so condescendingly referenced. But that would require time, energy, and resources I couldn't commit while trying to be the perfect Wilson wife. A notification pinged on my phone. An email from a boutique in Seattle interested in carrying my upcycled jacket line. Another from a sustainable fashion blogger wanting to feature my story. Opportunities knocking, while I stood frozen in a life that was slowly suffocating me. I was still sitting at the kitchen island when Daniel emerged from his office 3 hours later. He looked surprised to find me there, as if he'd expected me to have gone to bed, the day's tensions neatly packed away until the next family gathering. "You're still up," he observed, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a beer. "We need to talk." The steadiness in my voice surprised even me. He leaned against the counter, wariness crossing his features. "About my mother? Becca, I'm sorry about today, but you know how she is. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I said. "And it's not just about your mother, it's about us. About who I've become trying to fit into your family." "What are you talking about? You're exaggerating again." There it was. The dismissal. The subtle shifting of reality to make me the problem. 3 years ago, before we got married, you told me you loved my drive, my independence. You said you admired how I was building something meaningful. I closed my laptop, looking directly at him. When did that become something that embarrassed you? Daniel set his beer down with more force than necessary. "I'm not embarrassed by you." "Then why don't you ever stand up for me? Why do you let your mother compare me to Vanessa like I'm some consolation prize you settled for?" "She's from a different generation. She has certain expectations that I'll never meet," I finished for him. "Because I'm not trying to meet them anymore, Daniel. I can't keep shrinking myself to fit into a space that was never meant for me." His expression hardened. "So what are you saying? That my family isn't good enough for you?" The twist was so typical that I almost laughed. Somehow my pain had been transformed into an attack on them. "I'm saying I deserve better than to be treated like an intruder in my own marriage." I took a deep breath. "I'm saying I'm going to focus on my business, my actual business, not my hobby. And if that doesn't align with what you and your family want, then maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing here." Daniel's face flushed with anger. You're giving me an ultimatum over a few comments at dinner? It's not an ultimatum, it's clarity. For the first time in years, I'm seeing things clearly. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration radiating from him. This is ridiculous. You're overreacting, as usual. My mother makes one comment about Vanessa. It wasn't one comment, Daniel. It's been a constant comparison since the day we got engaged. And it's not just about Vanessa. I stood up, suddenly needing space between us. It's about the fact that you've never once chosen me over your family's expectations. Not once. The silence that followed was deafening. Daniel stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. Perhaps he was. Perhaps the Becca who had finally had enough was someone neither of us recognized. I can't deal with this tonight, he finally said, reaching for his keys on the counter. I'm going for a drive. We'll talk when you're being more reasonable. More reasonable. Code for when you've swallowed your feelings and decided to maintain the status quo. But as the door closed behind him, I knew something had fundamentally changed. Not just in our marriage, but in me. The woman who had walked into Elaine Wilson's house that morning wasn't the same one standing in this kitchen now. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I moved through our condo like someone in a dream, opening drawers, assessing what belonged to me and what didn't. How had I accumulated so little that was truly mine in 3 years of marriage? My clothes, my business materials, a few books. The jade pendant my grandmother had given me before she passed, the one Elaine had called quaint with that tight smile of hers. By the time Daniel returned 2 hours later, I had 3 suitcases packed and waiting by the door. He stopped short when he saw them, his keys dangling from his hand. "What is this?" he asked, though it was perfectly obvious. "I'm staying at Maya's for a while," I said. "I need space to think." He looked genuinely shocked, as if he'd expected me to be in bed, perhaps having cried myself to sleep but ultimately ready to continue our cycle. "You're leaving? Just like that?" "Not just like that. After 3 years of trying to be someone I'm not." Daniel's expression shifted from shock to anger. "So you're walking out on our marriage because my mother hurt your feelings? Do you have any idea how childish that sounds?" I picked up the smallest suitcase, which contained my laptop and business documents. "That's exactly the problem, Daniel. You've never understood that it's not about hurt feelings. It's about respect. It's about partnership. It's about not having to constantly apologize for my existence. You're being dramatic, and you're being exactly like your mother." The words came out before I could stop them, and I knew immediately they'd hit their mark. Daniel's face went pale. For a long moment, we just stood there, 3 years of marriage crystallizing into this one painful moment. Then Daniel's phone rang, the distinct ringtone he'd assigned to his mother. Of course, even now Elaine's timing was impeccable. He made no move to answer it, but he didn't need to. The sound was enough, a perfect symbol of the intrusion that had characterized our entire relationship. "I'll call you in a few days," I said, gathering my remaining bags. "We can talk about next steps then." "Next steps?" His voice had lost its anger, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "Becca, wait. Let's just calm down and discuss this." But I was already moving past him toward the door. "I am calm, Daniel. Calmer than I've been in years." As I walked out, I heard his phone ring again. Elaine, persistent as always. I wondered briefly what new criticism she had to offer, what fresh comparison to Vanessa she'd thought of since dinner. It didn't matter anymore. For the first time since I'd met the Wilsons, their opinion of me didn't define my worth. Maya lived in a converted warehouse apartment in Portland's Pearl District, a bright open space filled with plants and vintage furniture that couldn't be more different from the sterile perfection of the Wilson aesthetic. When I showed up at her door at nearly midnight with 3 suitcases and swollen eyes, she didn't ask questions. She just opened her arms and then opened a bottle of wine. "I left Daniel," I said once we were settled on her oversized sectional, glasses in hand. "About damn time," she replied, then immediately looked contrite. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive." I surprised myself by laughing. A genuine laugh that felt foreign after years of the polite, measured chuckles that were appropriate. "In Wilson Company." "No, it's fine. You've been telling me for years that the situation was toxic." Maya had never hidden her dislike for how the Wilsons treated me, particularly Elaine with her constant comparisons to the sainted Vanessa. I'd always defended them, making excuses for their behavior, insisting they just needed time to accept me. "What happened?" she asked, tucking her feet under her. I told her about the dinner, the apple pie disaster, the comments about my business, the familiar comparison to Daniel's ex. But even as I recounted the events, I realized it wasn't just about today. It was like suddenly seeing the past 3 years clearly, I explained. How I've been twisting myself into knots trying to be good enough for them. How Daniel has never really stood up for me. How I've put my dreams on hold to try to fit into their world. Maya nodded, her expression a mixture of sympathy and relief. "And your business? Green Thread?" "That's part of it too. I've been playing it safe, keeping it small, because every time I talked about expanding, Elaine would make some comment about proper careers, and Daniel would get that uncomfortable look on his face." I took a sip of wine, feeling a rush of determination. "But I've been getting interest, real interest from stores and influencers. With the right focus, I could turn this into something significant." "You absolutely could," Maya agreed. "Your designs are amazing, Becca, and the sustainable angle is right for Portland." For the first time in months, I allowed myself to really envision it. A proper studio space instead of the corner of our guest room, a small team helping with production, my upcycled pieces in boutiques across the Pacific Northwest. It had always been the dream, but I'd buried it beneath layers of Wilson-approved ambitions. "I can stay here as long as you need," Maya offered. "The sofa pulls out, and honestly, I've missed having you around since you got married and moved into Stepford wife training." I laughed again, even as tears threatened. "I don't even know what happens next. I've never just walked out on someone before." "You take it one day at a time," Maya said, squeezing my hand. "And you remember that you're Rebecca Chen, the most talented, determined woman I know." Rebecca Chen, not Rebecca Wilson. For the first time since my wedding day, that felt like an important distinction. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months, despite the unfamiliar sounds of Maya's loft and the questionable comfort of her pull-out couch. No anxious checking to make sure my morning routine wouldn't disturb Daniel. No mental rehearsal of acceptable topics for the next Wilson family gathering. Just sleep, deep and restorative. My phone showed 6 missed calls from Daniel when I checked it the next morning. No voicemails. Typical Daniel, wanting to talk but not willing to commit his thoughts to anything as concrete as a recording. I sent him a brief text. "I'm safe." At Maya's. "Need time to think." "We'll call in a few days to discuss things." His response came immediately. "We can fix this. Come home." The fact that he still didn't understand, that he thought this was a temporary tantrum rather than a fundamental breaking point, confirmed I'd made the right choice. I silenced my phone and opened my laptop. If I was really doing this, reclaiming my life, refocusing on my business, then I needed a plan. Maya had left for her job at a local art gallery, leaving me the run of her spacious loft. I spread my business documents across her dining table and began to assess where I truly stood. Green Thread Apparel had started as a passionate side project, taking vintage clothing and transforms them through sustainable techniques into modern wearable pieces. I'd begun with just my own designs, but had slowly built a small network of local seamstresses who worked with me on a project basis. Our sales had been modest but growing, mostly through craft fairs and a basic website I'd built myself. At the Maui, numbers weren't life-changing, but they were promising. With focused attention and the right investment, I could scale up in a meaningful way. The real question was, did I have the courage to bet on myself? As I stared at the spreadsheets, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, assuming it was spam, but something made me check. It was from Olivia, Daniel's sister. Mom's on the warpath. Says you're having a breakdown, just FYI. I blinked at the screen, surprised. Olivia and I had never been close. She'd always seemed to take her mother's side in the ongoing assessment of my shortcomings. This felt almost like a warning. An alliance? Thanks for the heads up, I replied after a moment's hesitation. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally. For what it's worth, I thought the comments about Vanessa were out of line. She cheated on Dan. Multiple times. Mom knows it too. The confirmation of what I'd long suspected hit me like a physical blow. All those comparisons, all those times Elaine had held up Vanessa as the gold standard I could never reach, and she'd known all along that her son's ex had betrayed him repeatedly. Somehow, this final piece of information solidified everything. The Wilsons' world was built on appearances, on convenient fictions that supported their narrative. I'd never fit because I was too real, too honest, too unwilling to fully embrace the lie. I didn't respond to Olivia. Instead, I turned back to my business plan with renewed determination. By the time Maya returned from work that evening, I had mapped out a 6-month strategy for Green Thread. Everything from finding a small production space to redesigning the website to approaching more boutiques. Damn, Maya said, looking over my shoulder at the plans. You're not messing around. No more half measures, I agreed. If I'm rebuilding my life, I'm going all in. The next morning, I called the one person who had always believed in me without reservation, my older brother Kevin, who ran a successful tech startup in Seattle. I need advice, I told him after explaining the situation, and maybe a loan. Kevin listened without judgment as I outlined my plans for Green Thread. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Send me your business plan, he finally said. If it looks solid, and knowing you, it will, I'll invest. Not a loan, an investment. 20% equity for whatever capital you need to get started properly. Tears sprang to my eyes. You don't have to do that. I know I don't. But I've seen your work, Becca. It's exceptional. And more importantly, I've seen how that family has dimmed your light for years. I'm betting on you taking it back. For the first time since walking out of my marriage, I felt something beyond anger and determination. Hope. Pure, unadulterated hope for a future I was designing myself. I called Daniel that evening, as promised. The conversation was brief and painful. He vacillated between pleading and accusations, never quite acknowledging the fundamental issues that had driven me away. Mom says you're just feeling insecure, he said at one point, that all marriages go through adjustment periods. This isn't about insecurity, Daniel. It's about the fact that for 3 years, I've been trying to earn a place in a family that never intended to give me one. I kept my voice steady, determined not to cry. I can't do it anymore. So you're just giving up? Throwing away our marriage because you can't handle a few critical comments? I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. He still didn't get it. Maybe he never would. I'm not giving up, Daniel. I'm choosing myself. There's a difference. After we hung up, I blocked Elaine's number. I wasn't ready to deal with whatever narrative she was constructing about my departure. For now, I needed space to focus on rebuilding. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Kevin came through with the investment, which allowed me to secure a small storefront with studio space in the back in Portland's Alberta Arts District. I hired 2 part-time seamstresses who shared my vision for sustainable fashion. I commissioned a proper website from a designer friend of Maya's who charged me startup rates in exchange for credits. I filed for divorce with the help of a lawyer. Maya recommended a straightforward process since Daniel and I had signed a prenup at Elaine's insistence. Ironic how her distrust of my intentions would now facilitate my clean break from the family. Daniel alternated between angry texts and emotional pleas. Occasionally, he would seem to understand, sending messages like, "I know I didn't always stand up for you. I'm sorry." But they were always followed by, "We can fix this if you come home. Mom says she'll make an effort. Too little, too late." I remained firm in my decision, even on the nights when loneliness crept in, when I questioned whether I was overreacting, whether I should have tried harder to make it work. Then I would remember Elaine's dismissive tone when speaking about my hobby business, the way Daniel had never fully defended me, the constant shadow of Vanessa, who, according to Olivia's occasional texts, had apparently cheated on Daniel with multiple partners during their relationship. And I would recommit to my path forward. 6 months after leaving the Wilson family behind, Green Thread had its official grand opening. My small shop in Alberta featured upcycled vintage pieces, sustainable basics, and accessories made from reclaimed materials. The local press covered it as part of Portland's growing eco-fashion scene. Orders from our new website exceeded my projections. 2 additional boutiques in Seattle had agreed to carry my designs. It wasn't an empire, but it was mine. Built with my vision, my hands, my determination. The woman who had once tried to shrink herself to fit the Wilson mold was gone, replaced by someone who stood firmly in her own power. I had just closed the shop one evening when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Thinking it might be a new client or vendor, I answered, "Is this Rebecca Chen?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "Yes, this is she." "This is Nurse Martinez from Providence Portland Medical Center. I'm calling because you're listed as an emergency contact for Elaine Wilson." My heart stuttered. What? There must be some mistake. "Are you not Rebecca Chen, daughter-in-law to Elaine Wilson?" Yes, technically, but we're not in contact. I'm in the process of divorcing her son." The nurse hesitated. "I see. Well, Mrs. Wilson was admitted today after a fall at home. She's stable, but she's asking for you specifically." I gripped the counter of my shop, my mind racing. Elaine was asking for me? The woman who had spent 3 years making me feel inadequate, at every turn was now requesting my presence at her hospital bedside? What about her husband? Her children? "Mr. Wilson is out of the country on business," according to Mrs. Wilson. "We've been unable to reach her son, and her daughter is apparently on her honeymoon overseas. You were next on her contact list." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. Of course Robert was away, probably on one of his frequent golf trips. Of course Daniel wasn't answering. He'd been dodging unknown numbers since our separation to avoid legal documents. And I vaguely recalled Olivia mentioning an upcoming wedding to her long-term boyfriend in her last text, which left me, the discarded daughter-in-law, as Elaine's only available support. "Ms. Chen, are you there?" I closed my eyes, weighing my options. I owed Elaine nothing. She had compared me unfavorably to Daniel's cheating ex, belittled my business, undermined my marriage at every turn. Walking away would be the easiest choice, and perhaps the most justified. But something stopped me. Not obligation, not guilt. Something more complex. "What room is she in?" I heard myself asking. As I locked up my shop and headed toward my car, I wondered what Elaine could possibly want from me after all this time. And I wondered, more importantly, what I wanted from this unexpected encounter with the woman who had once made me doubt my worth. Whatever awaited me at Providence Portland Medical Center, I knew one thing for certain. I was no longer the Rebecca who had left the Wilson family 6 months ago. I was stronger now, more certain. The woman driving to face her former tormentor was finally, completely herself. Providence Portland Medical Center smelled like all hospitals, antiseptic with undertones of cafeteria food and wilting flowers. I followed the nurse's directions to the 3rd floor, each step deliberate as I prepared myself for whatever awaited me in room 312. What did Elaine want? Was this some elaborate ploy to guilt me back into Daniel's life? Or was she genuinely alone and in need? I paused outside her door, gathering my composure. The woman who had once told me that my cooking would never quite measure up to Wilson standards was now asking for my help. The irony wasn't lost on me. I pushed the door open quietly, half expecting to find Elaine sitting regally against her. Pillows, perfectly coiffed despite her hospitalization. Instead, I found a diminished version of my former mother-in-law. Her silver hair lay flat against the pillow, her usual makeup absent, making her look older, frailer. A nasty bruise bloomed across her right cheekbone, and her wrist was wrapped in a temporary cast. For a moment, she didn't notice me. Her eyes were fixed on the muted television mounted on the wall, though I doubted she was actually watching it. There was something vacant in her expression, something I'd never seen before in the perpetually composed Elaine Wilson. "Elaine?" I said softly. She turned, and the flash of relief that crossed her face seemed genuine enough to surprise me. "Rebecca." Her voice was hoarse. "You came." I moved into the room, keeping a careful distance from the bed. The nurse called. "Said you asked for me." Elaine nodded slightly, then winced as if the movement caused her pain. "I fell down the stairs at home. Stupid, really. I was carrying a box of Daniel's old things from the attic and missed a step. I set my purse down on the visitor's chair. They said Robert's out of town? Singapore, some investment conference." She attempted a dismissive wave with her good hand. "Olivia's on her honeymoon in Greece. And Daniel." She trailed off, uncertainty crossing her features. "Isn't answering his phone," I finished for her. Typical. When things got difficult, Daniel had a habit of making himself scarce. Elaine sighed. "They're keeping me overnight for observation. Possible concussion, along with the broken wrist and some bruising. I wouldn't have bothered you, but..." She hesitated, something like embarrassment crossing her features. "There's no one else." The words hung between us, heavy with implications. This proud woman, who had spent years building a fortress around her family, found herself alone when she actually needed support. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt an unexpected twinge of compassion. Not forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that. But simple human empathy for someone vulnerable and alone. "What do you need?" I asked, my voice neutral. Relief softened her features. "Just some things from home. Toiletries, a nightgown, my medication. The doctor says I shouldn't be alone for the next 24 hours after discharge, but I've already arranged for a home health aide tomorrow." Of course she had. Heaven forbid Elaine Wilson should appear needy. "I can get your things," I said, surprising myself with the offer. "Do you have keys?" She gestured toward the small cabinet beside her bed. "In my purse. The security code is 1214. December 14th. Daniel's birthday. Some things never changed. I retrieved her keys, noting the familiar Tiffany keychain Robert had given her for their anniversary years ago. "Anything specific you need?" Elaine gave me a list. Her preferred nightgown, second drawer, right side. Her face creams, arranged by order of application on her vanity. Her medications, in the kitchen cabinet beside the refrigerator, not. The bathroom. "I don't like guests seeing medications in the bathroom," she explained, as if that were the most natural concern in the world. As I turned to leave, she called out, "Rebecca?" I paused at the door, looking back at this strange, diminished version of the woman who had made me feel so inadequate for so long. "Thank you," she said, the words sounding unfamiliar on her lips. "I know you have every reason to have told the nurse to find someone else." I nodded, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented acknowledgement. "I'll be back in about an hour." The drive to Lake Oswego felt surreal. 6 months since I'd been anywhere near the Wilson family home, and now I was returning with the matriarch's blessing and her keys. Life had a strange way of bringing things full circle. The house looked the same, a stately Tudor-style home on a quiet, tree-lined street where every lawn was impeccably maintained, and luxury cars sat in every driveway. I punched in the security code and stepped into the foyer, immediately enveloped by the familiar scent of Elaine's preferred lemon furniture polish and the faint trace of Robert's cigars, which he insisted on smoking only in his study with the window open. Standing in the entryway, I was struck by how little had changed. The same tasteful artwork, the same perfectly arranged furniture that looked more suited to a museum than a home where people actually lived. And yet, something felt different. The house seemed emptier somehow, the silence more pronounced. I made my way upstairs to the master bedroom, feeling like an intruder despite having Elaine's permission. The room was as immaculate as ever, the bed made with precise hospital corners, not a single item out of place on the surfaces. I found her nightgown exactly where she said it would be, folded with military precision in her drawer. As I gathered, her toiletries from the bathroom, arranged in the specific order she had described. I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had last stood in this house. My hair was shorter now, cut into a sleek bob that suited the business owner I'd become. The nervous tension that had once been a constant companion around the Wilsons was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. I looked happy. Despite everything, despite the strangeness of this moment, I was happier than I'd been in the entirety of my marriage. I collected the remaining items from Elaine's list and headed back downstairs. As I passed Robert's study, something caught my eye. The door was ajar, papers scattered across his usually pristine desk. Curious, I paused. Robert. Wilson was notoriously meticulous about his space. Even Daniel wasn't allowed to disturb anything in his father's sanctuary. I shouldn't look. It wasn't my business, wasn't my home, wasn't my family anymore. But something pulled me forward. Maybe it was the journalist I'd once been before marriage had redirected my ambitions toward more suitable pursuits. Maybe it was simple human curiosity. The papers were financial documents, investment statements, bank notices, what looked like a letter from an attorney. I didn't touch anything, just scanned what was visible from where I stood. Words jumped out at me: significant losses, margin call, foreclosure notice, immediate attention required. With a jolt, I realized what I was seeing. The Wilsons, the perfect, prosperous, prestigious Wilsons, were in financial trouble. Serious financial trouble from the look of it. I stepped back, processing this information. It explained some things: Robert's increased absences, allegedly for business, the tension I'd noticed in Elaine's posture when I mentioned his travel, perhaps even her fall, if she'd been distracted by their mounting problems. It wasn't my concern. Whatever financial crisis the Wilsons were facing had nothing to do with me, not anymore. I'd walked away from their family, from their values, from their world of appearances over substance. And yet, as I drove back to the hospital with Elaine's things, the knowledge sat heavily in my mind. Not because I took pleasure in their troubles, I wasn't that person, but because it cast our history in a different light. How much of Elaine's obsession with status and appearance had been driven by insecurity? How much of her controlling behavior had been an attempt to maintain the facade of Wilson perfection, even as it crumbled from within? Elaine was dozing when I returned to her room. I set her bag of belongings on the bedside table quietly, intending to leave without waking her. But as I turned to go, Her eyes fluttered open. "You came back," she murmured, sounding surprised. "I said I would." I gestured to the bag. "Everything you asked for should be there." She struggled to sit up, wincing with the effort. Instinctively, I moved to help her, adjusting her pillows so she could sit more comfortably. The act felt intimate in a way that was unfamiliar between us. I couldn't recall ever having physical contact with Elaine beyond the most perfunctory of greeting hugs. "Thank you," she said again, her voice small. Then, after a pause, "How is your business doing?" The hesitation before business was slight but noticeable, a ghost of her former dismissiveness. But she had asked, which was more acknowledgement than she'd ever given Green Thread before. "It's doing well," I said simply. "We opened a storefront in Alberta last month." "We?" "I have 2 part-time employees now, seamstresses." She nodded slowly. "That's impressive. Starting a business isn't easy." I almost laughed at the understatement. Starting a business while recovering from a failed marriage and rebuilding my entire sense of self had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. But Elaine's acknowledgement, however minimal, was unprecedented. "Daniel mentioned you're on the local news," she added, surprising me further. "Something about sustainable fashion?" The fact that Daniel had been talking about me, and positively, it seemed, was unexpected. Even more so that Elaine had been listening. Portland Monthly did a feature on local eco-friendly businesses, I confirmed. We were included. Something like pride flickered across her face, so briefly I might have imagined it. "I always thought you had a good eye for design." The compliment, possibly the first she'd ever given me, landed awkwardly between us. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply nodded. Elaine fidgeted with the edge of her hospital blanket. "Daniel told us about the divorce papers." And there it was, the real reason she'd called me here. Not for the overnight bag, which she could have asked a neighbor or service to retrieve, but for this conversation. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "My lawyer filed them last month. He still loves you, you know." I sighed, suddenly tired. "Elaine, if you called me here to advocate for Daniel—" "No," she interrupted, surprising me. "That's not why." She looked down at her hands, one encased in the temporary cast. The fall gave me time to think. About many things. I waited, uncertain where this was going. "I wasn't an easy mother-in-law," she finally said, each word seeming to cost her effort. "I know that." The understatement was so enormous that I might have laughed if the moment weren't so strange, so fragile. "No," I agreed quietly. "You weren't." She met my eyes then, her gaze clearer than it had been since I arrived. "I've spent my life focused on how things appear rather than how they are. It's exhausting." The admission hung in the air between us. I thought of the financial documents I'd seen in Robert's study, wondered if she was obliquely referencing their troubles. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Elaine looked away, out the window where darkness had fallen over the city. "Because nearly breaking my neck falling downstairs has a way of clarifying things. And because you're the only one who came when I called." She paused. "Appearances versus reality. I've been forced to consider the difference." I sat down in the visitor's chair, suddenly needing to take the weight off my legs. This vulnerable, reflective version of Elaine Wilson was more disorienting than the hospital setting around us. "I should go," I said after a moment. "It's getting late, and you need rest." Elaine nodded, reaching for the bag I'd brought her. "Of course. Thank you again for bringing these things. I appreciate it." As I stood to leave, she added, "Rebecca, would it be too much to ask if you could check on the house tomorrow? Just to make sure I turned everything off before the ambulance came." I was quite disoriented. I hesitated. One errand to bring necessities to an injured woman was charitable. Continued involvement was something else entirely. But there was something in Elaine's expression, a mixture of pride and desperation, that resonated with me. I knew what it was to need help, but struggled to ask for it directly. "I'll stop by in the morning," I conceded. "Text me if you think of anything specific I should check." Relief softened her features. "Thank you." As I drove back to my apartment, I'd moved out of Maya's loft after 2 months, finding a small but charming space above a bookstore in Mississippi. I tried to make sense of the day's events. Elaine Wilson asking for my help, showing vulnerability, even offering what might have been an apology. It felt like an alternate reality. My phone rang through my car speakers. Maya's name appeared on the display. "Hey," I answered, grateful for the distraction from my thoughts. "What's up?" "Where have you been?" Maya demanded. "I've been trying to reach you all evening. Did you forget dinner? We've been waiting at Bamboo Sushi for half an hour." I groaned, suddenly remembering our plans. With everything that had happened with Elaine, I'd completely forgotten the dinner I'd arranged with Maya and Kevin, who was in town for a tech conference. "I'm so sorry. Something came up. You're not going to believe this, but Elaine Wilson is in the hospital, and somehow I got roped into helping her." Maya's shock was audible. "Elaine, Vanessa would have done it better, Wilson? That Elaine?" "The very same. Why on earth would you help her after everything she put you through?" It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself all evening. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe because no one else would. Maybe because I'm trying to be the bigger person. Or maybe I'm just a sucker for punishment. Or maybe you're just a genuinely good person, unlike your former in-laws," Maya suggested. "But be careful, Becca. People like Elaine don't change overnight, hospital stay or not. Trust me, I know." I sighed. "Tell Kevin I'm sorry I missed him. Can we reschedule for tomorrow night?" "He says that works. But seriously, Becca, don't get pulled back into their drama. You've worked too hard to build your new life." After we hung up, I sat in my parked car outside my apartment building, Maya's warning echoing in my mind. She was right to be concerned. The Wilsons had a way of making everything about them, of drawing people into their orbit and rearranging lives to suit their needs. I'd spent 3 years being reshaped by their expectations. I couldn't afford to fall back into old patterns. And yet, as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I couldn't shake the image of Elaine in that hospital bed. Diminished, vulnerable, alone. For the first time, I'd seen the human beneath the perfect exterior she presented to the world. It complicated the narrative I'd constructed about her, about all of them. The next morning, I opened the shop later than usual, putting a sign on the door explaining the adjusted hours. My assistant manager, Tessa, was surprised. I was usually obsessively punctual, a habit ironically instilled in me during my Wilson years. "Everything okay?" she asked as I hurried in just before our delayed opening time. "Family emergency," I said, then caught myself. They weren't my family anymore. "Well, not family exactly. It's complicated." Tessa raised an eyebrow, but didn't press further. One of the things I appreciated about her was her respect for boundaries, a quality I was still learning to cultivate myself. The morning passed in a blur of customers, online order fulfillment, and a conference call with a boutique in San Francisco interested in carrying our upcycled denim collection. By lunchtime, I had almost forgotten my promise to check on Elaine's house. But a text message reminder from her, polite, almost hesitant in tone, sent me back to Lake Oswego during my lunch break. The house was as I'd left it the previous evening. I walked through each room, checking that appliances were off. Windows closed, doors locked. There was nothing amiss. Nothing that required my attention. I was about to leave when the doorbell rang. For a moment, I froze. This wasn't my house, and I had no idea who might be at the door or how to explain my presence. But the bell rang. Again, more insistently this time, and I made a split-second decision to answer it. Perhaps it was a neighbor checking on Elaine, someone I could inform about her condition. I opened the door to find a man in his early 60s wearing an impeccable suit and a grave expression. He blinked in surprise when he saw me. "I'm sorry," he said, consulting a small notepad. "I must have the wrong address. I'm looking for Robert or Elaine Wilson." "This is the Wilson residence," I confirmed. I hesitated. What was I, exactly? Not a daughter-in-law anymore. Not quite a stranger. "I'm looking after the house while Elaine is in the hospital." The man's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Hospital? I wasn't aware. Nothing serious, I hope." "A fall. She's expected to be released today or tomorrow." He nodded, then seemed to remember himself. "I'm Harrison Wells from Pacific Northwest Trust. I had an appointment with Mr. Wilson today regarding some urgent financial matters. Since neither of them is available, I'll have to reschedule." He handed me a business card. "Would you please ask them to call my office at their earliest convenience? It really is quite pressing." I took the card, noting the bank's logo and his title, Senior Vice President, Wealth Management. "I'll let them know." As he turned to leave, he hesitated. "If I might ask, are you a relative?" The question caught me off guard. I was married to their son." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah, I see. Former daughter-in-law." He seemed to be weighing his words carefully. "In that case, perhaps it's not my place to mention this, but given the circumstances, the Wilsons are facing some significant financial decisions in the coming weeks, decisions that could impact the entire family." I maintained a neutral expression, even as I recalled the documents I'd seen in Robert's study. "I'm no longer part of the family, Mr. Wells. I'm just helping out temporarily." He nodded, looking slightly relieved. "Of course. Just please do emphasize the urgency of them contacting me. Good day." I watched him walk back to his luxury sedan, processing this latest piece of information. The Wilsons' financial troubles weren't just serious, they were urgent enough for their banker to make house calls. It still wasn't my problem. I had my own business to run, my own life to build. But as I locked up the house and headed back to my shop, I found myself thinking about Elaine's words from the previous evening. "I've spent my life focused on how things appear rather than how they are. It's exhausting." For the first time, I wondered what price the Wilsons had paid for their perfect facade, and who would be asked to pay when that facade finally crumbled. I returned to the hospital that evening after closing the shop, bringing Elaine a change of clothes for her discharge the next day. She seemed surprised to see me again, especially since I'd already fulfilled my promise to check on the house. "Your banker came by," I told her, setting the clothes on the foot of her bed. "Harrison Wells. He said it was urgent that you or Robert contact him." Elaine's face paled slightly. "Did he say what it was regarding?" I chose my words carefully. "He mentioned significant financial decisions that could affect the family." She looked away, her fingers plucking nervously at the hospital blanket. "Robert handles all of that. I don't get involved in the finances." The statement was so outdated, so reflective of an older generation's division of marital responsibilities, that I almost challenged it. But Elaine's discomfort was palpable, and I reminded myself that her financial situation was not my concern. "I told him you were in the hospital," I said. "He left his card. I put it on the kitchen counter." Elaine nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. I should leave, I thought. I'd done what I'd promised, checked the house, delivered clothes, passed on the message from the banker. There was no reason to prolong this strange reconnection with a woman who had once made me feel so inadequate. But something kept me there. standing awkwardly at the foot of her hospital bed. "Elaine," I said finally, "is everything all right? With you and Robert, I mean." She looked up then, surprise evident in her expression. Perhaps she hadn't expected concern from me, of all people. For a moment, I saw her internal struggle, the instinct to maintain appearances warring with the reality of her situation. "We're fine," she said automatically, then sighed. "No, that's not true. We're not fine. But it's nothing for you to worry about, Rebecca. You've already done more than enough, considering." She trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. "Considering how I treated you. Considering you're divorcing my son. I should have left it at that. Should have wished her well and walked away, back to my new life, my business, my hard-won independence. But the journalist in me, the part that had been suppressed during my years with the Wilsons, couldn't let it go. The papers in Robert's study," I said quietly. "I wasn't snooping, but I saw them when I was at the house. It looks serious." Elaine's eyes widened, then she seemed to deflate, as if the effort of maintaining the facade had suddenly become too much. "It is serious," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Robert made some investments that didn't work out. And there were other issues, expenses we shouldn't have taken on, loans that came due." I sat down in the visitor's chair, surprised by her candor. "How bad is it?" She closed her eyes briefly. "We might lose the house. The lake house is already gone. Robert sold it last month, but it wasn't enough. There's a second mortgage, credit card debt." She shook her head. "I don't know all the details. As I said, Robert handled the finances. The past tense wasn't lost on me. And now? Now he's in Singapore, supposedly securing new investors for his firm. But the truth is, he's avoiding the mess here." A bitter edge crept into her voice. "He's very good at that, avoiding unpleasantness. Like father, like son, I thought but didn't say." Daniel had inherited more than just Robert's chin and height, it seemed. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Whatever my issues with Elaine, I wouldn't wish financial ruin on anyone. She gave me a sharp look. "Are you?" "I wasn't exactly kind to you, Rebecca." The blunt acknowledgement took me by surprise. "No, you weren't," I agreed. "But that doesn't mean I want to see you suffer." Elaine studied me for a long moment, her gaze more penetrating than I remembered. Or perhaps it was just that I was seeing her clearly for the first time, without the filter of intimidation that had colored our previous interactions. "You've changed," she said finally. "Yes, I have." "It suits you." She nodded toward the bag I'd brought her. "Thank you for the clothes, and for checking on the house." It was a dismissal, gentle but clear. Whatever moment of vulnerability we'd just shared had passed, and Elaine Wilson was reassembling her armor, piece by piece. I stood, gathering my purse. "You're welcome. I hope you feel better soon." As I reached the door, she called after me. "Rebecca?" I turned back. "I was wrong about you," she said, her voice steady despite the effort these words clearly cost her. "You did bring something valuable to this family. We just didn't know how to see it." The admission left me speechless. Of all the things I might have expected from Elaine Wilson, criticism, judgment, even grudging gratitude for my help, this acknowledgement was the least anticipated. I nodded once, not trusting my voice, and left the room. In the hospital parking lot, I sat in my car for a long time, replaying Elaine's words in my mind. "You did bring something valuable to this family." After 3 years of being measured and found wanting, of comparisons to the sainted Vanessa, of subtle and not so subtle, indications that I wasn't quite good enough for the Wilson name, this belated recognition shouldn't have mattered, but it did. Not because I still craved Elaine's approval. I'd long since moved beyond that. but because it confirmed what I'd finally come to believe about myself, that I was enough, exactly as I was, that I had always been enough. My phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. Daniel's name flashed on the screen, the first direct contact he'd attempted in weeks. I hesitated, then answered. Becca? His voice was tight with concern. The hospital called me. They said you've been visiting my mother? What's going on? Of course. Now he calls, I thought, a familiar irritation rising. Not when his mother initially fell, not when she needed someone to bring her things from home, but now when he'd realized I was involved. She fell down the stairs at home, I explained, keeping my tone neutral. Broken wrist, bruises, possible concussion. She's being discharged tomorrow. Why are you involved? We're getting divorced. The bluntness of the question stung, even though I had no right to be hurt by it. Because she asked for my help, Daniel. Because no one else was there. A heavy sigh came through the line. I was in Seattle for a client meeting. I had my phone off during presentations. For 2 days? A pause. No, I saw the missed calls. I assumed it was about the divorce papers. I wasn't ready to deal with that. Typical Daniel, avoiding difficult conversations, pretending problems didn't exist until they became impossible to ignore. It was a family trait, it seemed. Well, now you know, I said. You should probably be there when she's discharged tomorrow. Another pause. I can't get back until late tomorrow night. I have meetings all day that I can't reschedule. I closed my eyes, fighting a wave of déjà vu. How many times had I heard variations of this from both Daniel and Robert? Important meetings, irreplaceable clients, commitments that couldn't possibly be broken, all while family needs took a distant second place. Your mother is in the hospital, Daniel. I know, but no, I interrupted, surprising both of us with my firmness. No buts. She's alone and injured. The business world will survive without you for 1 day. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken tension. Then, unexpectedly, he sighed. You're right. I'll reschedule and drive back tonight. He hesitated. Thank you for helping her. The gratitude seemed genuine, another surprise in a day full of them. You're welcome, though you should know. I debated whether to tell him about the Wilsons' financial situation, then decided it wasn't my place. You should talk to your parents. Soon. There are things happening that you need to know about. What things? Ask your mother, I said firmly. Or your father if you can reach him. It's not my place to say more. I ended the call before he could press further, not wanting to get pulled deeper into the Wilson family drama. I had done what decency required, helped an injured woman, passed along an urgent message, alerted her son to her condition. My obligation was fulfilled. And yet, as I finally started my car and drove toward home, I couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected reconnection with the Wilsons was far from over. Something had shifted, in Elaine, in me, in the strange, tangled dynamic between us. A door had opened, however, slightly to a different kind of relationship than the one we'd had during my marriage to Daniel. The question was, did I want to walk through it? Or was it safer to close it firmly and continue on the independent path I'd fought so hard to create? I had no answer as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, only the certainty that tomorrow would bring new complications, and perhaps new clarity. Morning light streamed through the large windows of my shop as I arranged a new display of upcycled denim jackets. Each piece represented hours of work, careful deconstruction of vintage garments, thoughtful reconstruction with sustainable materials, hand-embroidered details that transformed the ordinary into something unique. The process wasn't unlike what I'd been doing with my own life these past 6 months, I reflected, taking what was broken and creating something new, something stronger. The shop was quiet this early, giving me time to think about Elaine's surprising confession. The Wilsons' financial troubles weren't just minor setbacks, they were potentially catastrophic. The family that had made me feel inadequate for years, the people who had measured success in possessions and appearances, were on the verge of losing everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just as I was finding my footing, building something, real and sustainable, they were watching their carefully constructed world crumble. I should have felt a sense of justice in that, but all I felt was a complicated mix of empathy and caution. The bell above the door jingled, pulling me from my thoughts. Maya walked in, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing an expression of determined concern. "Intervention time," she announced, setting one of the cups on the counter. "I'm staging a friendship intervention before you get sucked back into the Wilson vortex." I couldn't help but smile as I accepted the coffee. "Good morning." "To you too." Maya hopped up to sit on the counter, ignoring my half-hearted protest. "Kevin told me you canceled dinner again last night. Let me guess, more Wilson drama?" I sighed, taking a sip of the perfectly prepared latte. Maya never forgot that I preferred oat milk and an extra shot. "I went back to the hospital to bring Elaine some clothes for her discharge." I hesitated, and I found out some things about their situation. Maya's eyebrows shot up. Their situation? This sounds ominous. "They're in financial trouble, serious financial trouble. It looks like they might lose their house." Maya whistled low. "The perfect Wilsons? Bankrupt? That's unexpected." "I know. And the thing is, Elaine actually admitted it to me. She was vulnerable, almost human." "Careful," Maya warned, her expression softening. "Just because she showed you a different side doesn't erase how she treated you for years." "I know that," I insisted, though a small part of me wondered if I did. There was something disarming about seeing Elaine stripped of her usual armor, about hearing her acknowledge, however indirectly, that she had misjudged me. "Look," Maya said, sliding off the counter to face me directly. "You have a good heart. It's one of the things I love about you. But these people spent years making you feel like you weren't enough. You don't owe them anything. Not your time, not your energy, and definitely not your emotional labor." She was right, of course. The logical part of my brain knew that. And yet. "I told Daniel about her condition," I admitted. "He's coming back from Seattle today." Maya's expression was a mixture of concern and resignation. "Then it's handled. He can deal with his parents' crisis. You can focus on your business, your healing, your future." The shop door jingled again as Tessa arrived, ending our conversation. Maya gave me a meaningful look before heading out, mouthing, "Call me later," as she left. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Customers browsing, a shipment of vintage denim arriving, a phone call from a local magazine wanting to feature green thread in an article about sustainable businesses. By lunchtime, I had almost convinced myself that Maya was right. The Wilsons' problems weren't mine anymore. Daniel was back. He could handle his parents' situation. I had done my part. Then my phone rang. An unknown number. "Is this Rebecca Chen?" a professional female voice asked when I answered. "Yes, speaking." "This is Marjorie Cunningham from Providence Portland Medical Center. I'm calling about Elaine Wilson. You're listed as her emergency contact." A sense of déjà vu washed over me. "Yes, but her son should be back in town now. Have you tried reaching him?" "We have, but he's not answering. Mrs. Wilson is being discharged this afternoon, and we need to confirm that someone will be with her for the next 24 hours, as per doctor's orders." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course Daniel wasn't answering. Despite his promise to return last night, he was probably still in Seattle, still in meetings, still putting business before family. "Has Mrs. Wilson arranged for home health care?" I asked, remembering her mention of a health aide. She had, but there's been a scheduling conflict. The service can't provide anyone until tomorrow morning. Ms. Cunningham's voice took on a note of concern. Mrs. Wilson insists she'll be fine on her own, but given her age and the nature of her injuries, particularly the possible concussion, we strongly advise against that. I should say no. I should explain that I'm the soon-to-be ex-daughter-in-law, that we're barely on speaking terms, that this isn't my responsibility. What time is she being discharged? I heard myself ask instead. 3:00. I glanced at my watch. It was just past noon. I'll be there. After hanging up, I leaned against the counter, questioning my decision. What was I doing? Getting involved in the Wilsons. Problems again went against everything I'd been working toward these past 6 months. And yet, the thought of Elaine alone in that big house, injured and vulnerable, troubled me. It wasn't about obligation, I realized. It wasn't even about being the bigger person. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who could offer compassion even to those who hadn't always shown it to me. Tessa agreed to handle the shop for the rest of the day, her raised eyebrow indicating that she had questions about my sudden departure, but was too professional to ask them. I promised to explain later, though I wasn't sure what explanation I could offer that wouldn't sound bizarre. I'm taking care of my former mother-in-law who once told me I wasn't good enough for her son, but who now needs my help because everyone else in her perfect family is absent. Yeah, that wouldn't sound strange at all. The hospital was bustling when I arrived, the organized chaos of shift change making it difficult to find someone who could direct me to Elaine's room. When I finally did, I discovered she was already dressed and sitting in a chair by the window, her broken wrist in a proper cast now, her overnight bag packed neatly beside her. "Rebecca," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "I didn't expect you to come." "The hospital called. Said you needed someone to stay with you for the next 24 hours. I hesitated in the doorway. They couldn't reach Daniel. Elaine's expression tightened slightly. He texted to say his return was delayed, some client emergency. The familiar excuse sounded hollow, even coming from her. "But you don't need to do this. I've arranged for a car service to take me home. I'll be perfectly fine on my own." "The doctor disagrees," I said, stepping into the room fully. "And so do I. You had a concussion, Elaine. Someone needs to monitor you overnight." She lifted her chin, a gesture I recognized from countless Wilson family gatherings, the physical embodiment of pride taking precedence over practicality. "I don't want to impose." "It's not an imposition if I'm offering." I reached for her bag. "The nurse said they're bringing a wheelchair to take you down to the discharge area." Elaine looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion lined her face, and after a moment, she simply nodded. "Thank you." The drive to Lake Oswego was quiet, Elaine staring out the window as suburban Portland gave way to the manicured neighborhoods where she lived. I wondered what she was thinking, about her home, about her family's financial situation, about the unexpected turn of events that had her dependent on the very person she had once judged so harshly. "It's different, seeing it from the outside," she said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. "What is?" She gestured vaguely toward the passing houses. "All of this, the perfect lawns, the perfect facades. When you're part of it, it seems so important. Keeping up appearances, making sure everything looks right." She glanced down at her cast. "But when you're sitting in a hospital bed, none of it matters much." I didn't know how to respond to this philosophical version of Elaine Wilson, so different from the judgmental woman I'd known. We lapsed back into silence until we reached her house. Inside, the emptiness felt more pronounced than before. No Robert, no household staff, likely another casualty of their financial troubles. Just Elaine moving carefully through rooms that suddenly seemed too large, too formal for actual living. "Can I get you anything?" I asked as she settled onto the sofa in the family room, the least formal space in the Wilson home. though still more resembling a furniture showroom than a place of comfort. "Some tea would be nice," she admitted, "and perhaps some help with these pain pills. The child-proof cap is challenging with one hand." I went to the kitchen, finding the tea where it had always been. Imported loose-leaf varieties organized in small glass jars, a relic of a time when the Wilsons could afford such luxuries without a second thought. As I waited for the water to boil, I wondered again about the specifics of their financial situation. How had Robert Wilson, always so careful with his image as a successful financial advisor, managed to bring them to the brink of ruin? I returned, with the tea and medication, to find Elaine staring at the collection of family photos on the mantel. There was Daniel's graduation from business school. Particularly the possible concussion, we strongly advise against that. I should say no. I should explain that I'm the soon-to-be ex-daughter-in-law, that we're barely on speaking terms, that this isn't my responsibility. What time is she being discharged? I heard myself ask instead. 3 o'clock. I glanced at my watch. It was just past noon. I'll be there. After hanging up, I leaned against the counter, questioning my decision. What was I doing? Getting involved in the Wilsons. Problems again went against everything I'd been working toward these past 6 months. And yet, the thought of Elaine alone in that big house, injured and vulnerable, troubled me. It wasn't about obligation, I realized. It wasn't even about being the bigger person. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be. Someone who could offer compassion even to those who hadn't always shown it to me. Tessa agreed to handle the shop for the rest of the day, her raised eyebrow indicating that she had questions about my sudden departure, but was too professional to ask them. I promised to explain later, though I wasn't sure what explanation I could offer that wouldn't sound bizarre. I'm taking care of my former mother-in-law who once told me I wasn't good enough for her son, but who now needs my help because everyone else in her perfect family is absent. Yeah, that wouldn't sound strange at all. The hospital was bustling when I arrived, the organized chaos of shift change making it difficult to find someone who could direct me to Elaine's room. When I finally did, I discovered she was already dressed and sitting in a chair by the window, her broken wrist in a proper cast now, her overnight bag packed neatly beside her. "Rebecca," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "I didn't expect you to come." "The hospital called. Said you needed someone to stay with you for the next 24 hours. I hesitated in the doorway. They couldn't reach Daniel. Elaine's expression tightened slightly. He texted to say his return was delayed, some client emergency. The familiar excuse sounded hollow, even coming from her. "But you don't need to do this. I've arranged for a car service to take me home. I'll be perfectly fine on my own." "The doctor disagrees," I said, stepping into the room fully. "And so do I. You had a concussion, Elaine. Someone needs to monitor you overnight." She lifted her chin, a gesture I recognized from countless Wilson family gatherings, the physical embodiment of pride taking precedence over practicality. "I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition if I'm offering." I reached for her bag. "The nurse said they're bringing a wheelchair to take you down to the discharge area." Elaine looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion lined her face, and after a moment, she simply nodded. "Thank you." The drive to Lake Oswego was quiet, Elaine staring out the window as suburban Portland gave way to the manicured neighborhoods where she lived. I wondered what she was thinking. About her home, about her family's financial situation, about the unexpected turn of events that had her dependent on the very person she had once judged so harshly. "It's different, seeing it from the outside," she said suddenly, as if reading my thoughts. "What is?" She gestured vaguely toward the passing houses. "All of this, the perfect lawns, the perfect facades. When you're part of it, it seems so important. Keeping up appearances, making sure everything looks right." She glanced down at her cast. "But when you're sitting in a hospital bed, none of it matters much. I didn't know how to respond to this philosophical version of Elaine Wilson, so different from the judgmental woman I'd known. We lapsed back into silence until we reached her house. Inside, the emptiness felt more pronounced than before. No Robert, no household staff, likely another casualty of their financial troubles, just Elaine moving carefully through rooms that suddenly seemed too large, too formal for actual living. "Can I get you anything?" I asked as she settled onto the sofa in the family room, the least formal space in the Wilson home, though still more resembling a furniture showroom than a place of comfort. "Some tea would be nice," she admitted, "and perhaps some help with these pain pills. The childproof cap is challenging with one hand." I went to the kitchen, finding the tea where it had always been. Imported loose-leaf varieties organized in small glass jars, a relic of a time when the Wilsons could afford such luxuries without a second thought. As I waited for the water to boil, I wondered again about the specifics of their financial situation. How had Robert Wilson, always so careful with his image as a successful financial advisor, managed to bring them to the brink of ruin? I returned, with the tea and medication, to find Elaine staring at the collection of family photos on the mantel. There was Daniel's graduation from business school, Olivia's wedding to her first husband, the one that had ended after just 16 months, Robert receiving some community leadership award, and tucked at the end, smaller than the others, my wedding photo with Daniel. I was surprised to see it, still displayed, given the circumstances. "I couldn't bring myself to take it down," Elaine said, noticing my gaze. "Despite everything, you were our family." The sentiment would have meant the world to me 3 years ago. Now, it simply added another layer of complexity to an already complicated situation. "Here's your tea," I said, setting it down on the coffee table along with her pills. "The doctor said to take these with food. Have you eaten today?" Elaine shook her head. "Hospital breakfast, but nothing since. I'm not particularly hungry." "You need to eat something with the medication. Let me check what's in the kitchen." The refrigerator was nearly empty. Some condiments, a half-empty carton of eggs, a container of yogurt past its expiration date. The pantry wasn't much better. It seemed the Wilsons' financial troubles had already impacted the basics. "There's not much," I called to her. "I can make some eggs, or I could order something for delivery." "Don't go to any trouble," Elaine replied, but I could hear the weariness in her voice. "It's no trouble. How about I order from that Thai place on State Street? You used to like their curry." A pause, then. "That would be lovely. Thank you." As I placed the order on my phone, I realized this was perhaps the most normal interaction Elaine and I had ever had. No judgment, no comparison to Vanessa, just the simple human exchange of one person caring for another. It was strange how circumstances could strip away the layers of pretense, leaving only the essential humanity beneath. While we waited for the food, I helped Elaine settle more comfortably, bringing her a blanket when I noticed her shivering slightly. "The heat is set lower than usual," she explained, a trace of embarrassment in her voice. "Just one of many adjustments we've had to make recently." I nodded, not wanting to press her on the details of their financial situation. If she wanted to talk about it, she would. "I realize this must seem quite ironic to you," she continued, surprising me with her candor. "After all those years of not being particularly welcoming to you." "It's not about irony, Elaine. It's just life. Circumstances change. People need help sometimes." She studied me for a long moment. "You've become quite wise, Rebecca." The compliment caught me off guard. "I don't know about wise. I've just learned a lot about what matters and what doesn't." "Like appearances versus reality," Elaine murmured, echoing her words from the hospital. "Yes, exactly like that." The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of our food. As I went to answer it, I reflected on the strangeness of this moment, sharing a meal with Elaine Wilson, having a genuine conversation without the usual undercurrents of judgment and disapproval. It was as if her fall had knocked down more than just her physical body. It had somehow dislodged the rigid persona she'd maintained for as long as I'd known her. We ate in the kitchen rather than the formal dining room, another departure from Wilson protocol. Elaine managed surprisingly well with her left hand, though I noticed her wincing occasionally when she moved too quickly. "So," she said after we'd eaten in companionable silence for a while, "tell me about this business of yours. Green thread, is it?" The interest seemed genuine, not the polite inquiry masking disapproval that I'd grown accustomed to during family dinners. "Yes, Green Thread Apparel. We upcycle vintage clothing and fabrics into new pieces, focusing on sustainability and ethical fashion." I found myself warming to the topic, describing our design philosophy, our small but growing customer base, our recent features in local media. Elaine listened attentively, asking questions that revealed she was actually engaging with the concept, not just going through the motions. "And this is profitable?" she asked finally. "It's getting there," I admitted. "We're still scaling up, but the growth has been steady. My brother invested initially, which helped with startup costs, and now we're reinvesting most of the profits back into the business." Elaine nodded thoughtfully. "Smart. Conservative growth is more sustainable in the long run." Something flickered across her face. Regret, perhaps, or irony at dispensing financial wisdom while her own family's finances were in shambles. "Daniel mentioned you're looking to expand," she added, surprising me again. "Opening another location?" The fact that Daniel had discussed my business with his mother, and not dismissively it seemed, was unexpected. "Eventually, yes. But first I want to establish our online presence more firmly, maybe offer some small-scale wholesale to select boutiques." I hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. "The divorce actually freed up some capital for me. The prenup entitled me to half the value of our condo, and Daniel bought out my share. I expected some reaction to the mention of the divorce, discomfort, perhaps, or a return to the coolness that had characterized our relationship during my marriage. Instead, Elaine simply nodded. "You always did have good business sense," she said. "I just didn't appreciate it at the time." The acknowledgement hung between us, neither of us quite knowing how to proceed from such an unprecedented moment of honesty. The silence was broken by the ringing of the landline phone, something I hadn't heard in years, as most people relied solely on cell phones now. Elaine started to rise, but I gestured for her to stay seated. "I'll get it." The phone was in Robert's study. I hesitated before entering the space, remembering the financial documents I'd seen scattered across his desk. But the persistent ringing drew me in. "Wilson residence," I answered, feeling strange saying those words again after so much time. "Rebecca?" Daniel's voice, surprised and a little wary. "What are you doing there?" "Your mother was discharged from the hospital today. The doctor ordered someone to stay with her overnight because of the concussion." I kept my voice neutral, factual. "The hospital couldn't reach you." A heavy sigh came through the line. "I know, I'm sorry. My flight was delayed, and then my phone died. I'm at the airport now waiting for a cab." He sounded genuinely contrite. "How is she?" "She's doing okay. Tired, sore, but the doctor says she should recover fully with rest." A pause then. "Thank you for being there for her. You didn't have to do that." "No, I didn't," I agreed. "Do you want to talk to her?" "Yes, please." I brought the cordless phone to Elaine, who took it with a small nod of thanks. I moved into the living room to give her privacy, but I could still hear her side of the conversation. "Yes, I'm fine. No, you don't need to come tonight. Rebecca is here. I don't know how long. Daniel, please don't argue about this right now. I'm tired. Yes, tomorrow is fine. Have you spoken to your father? Well, try again. It's important. I know he's busy, but this can't wait. Yes. All right. Good night. She sounded exhausted when she hung up, the brief conversation seeming to drain what little energy she had left. Daniel's at the airport, she said unnecessarily. He'll come by tomorrow. I nodded. You should rest. The doctor said you need to take it easy for a few days. Elaine started to rise from her chair, then swayed slightly. I moved quickly to her side, supporting her with a gentle hand on her elbow. I'm fine, she insisted, but allowed me to help her upstairs to her bedroom. The master suite was as immaculate as the rest of the house, though I noticed subtle signs of Robert's absence. Only one bedside table had a book and reading glasses. Only one side of the walk-in closet showed signs of recent use. Robert's been staying at the club when he's in town, Elaine said, following my gaze. For the past month or so. I didn't know how to respond to this glimpse into their marital troubles, so I simply helped her get settled, bringing her medication and a glass of water, making sure she had everything she needed within reach. The guest room is made up, she said as I turned to leave. Second door on the right. The sheets are clean. The assumption that I would be staying overnight surprised me, though it made sense given the doctor's orders. Still, I hadn't explicitly agreed to it, had only said I would be there for her discharge. I didn't bring anything for overnight, I said, hesitating in the doorway. There are new toothbrushes in the guest bathroom, and I'm sure you can find something of mine to sleep in if needed. A faint smile touched her lips. Though I know my taste isn't exactly to your liking. The gentle self-mockery was so unexpected from Elaine Wilson that I found myself returning her smile. I think I can manage for one night. As I turned again to leave, she called after me. Rebecca? I looked back to find her watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between gratitude and puzzlement, as if she couldn't quite make sense of my willingness to help her. Thank you, not just for today, but for being the kind of person who would do this. After everything. The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the polite, society-appropriate gratitude I'd heard her express countless times at charity events and dinner parties. This was raw, genuine thankfulness. Perhaps the first truly authentic emotion I'd ever witnessed from Elaine Wilson. You're welcome, I said simply. Get some rest. Call if you need anything. Downstairs, I called Maya to let her know I wouldn't be home tonight. Her response was predictably concerned. You're staying at their house? Becca, are you sure that's a good idea? It's just for one night. The doctor said someone needs to keep an eye on her because of the concussion and there's no one else available. There's always someone else available, Maya argued. Home health aides, private nurses, the Wilsons can afford it. I hesitated, not wanting to betray Elaine's confidence about their financial situation. It's complicated. Anyway, it's just one night. Daniel will be here tomorrow. Ah, Daniel. And how does it feel, being around your ex again? He's not here yet, I clarified. And I don't know. We'll see tomorrow, I guess. Maya sighed, her concern evident even through the phone. Just be careful, okay? Don't let them pull you back into their world. You've worked too hard to build your own. After we hung up, I wandered through the quiet house, feeling like a visitor in a place that had once been part of my life. The Wilson home had never felt like mine, even when I was married to Daniel. It had always been Elaine's domain, governed by her rules, her taste, her expectations. Yet now, with Elaine vulnerable and dependent upstairs, the dynamic had shifted in ways I was still trying to understand. I found myself in Robert's study again, drawn by the mystery of the Wilsons' sudden financial downfall. The papers I'd glimpsed earlier were gone, presumably filed away or taken by Robert before his trip to Singapore. But the computer on his desk was on, the screen showing a password prompt. I backed away, not willing to cross that line. Whatever. Their financial troubles, it wasn't my place to investigate. I had agreed to help Elaine through one night. I wasn't getting involved in their larger problems. As I turned to leave, my eye caught a framed photo on the wall that I hadn't noticed before. It was from Daniel's and my wedding, not the formal portrait that was displayed on the mantel, but a candid shot from the reception. Daniel and I were dancing, laughing at something, genuinely happy in that moment. It was strange to see it displayed so prominently in Robert's private space, this evidence that there had been real joy in our relationship, despite how it ended. A noise from upstairs startled me, a thump, followed by Elaine calling my name. I hurried up the stairs to find her standing unsteadily in the hallway, her face pale. "I'm sorry," she said, leaning heavily against the wall. "I got dizzy when I stood up. I was trying to reach the bathroom. Here, let me help you." I put an arm around her waist, supporting her as she made her way to the ensuite bathroom. "You should have called me before trying to get up." "I didn't want to bother you," she said, though the effort of speaking seemed to tax her remaining strength. "That's why I'm here, Elaine. To help." I stopped at the bathroom door. "Can you manage from here, or do you need me to stay?" She straightened slightly, dignity reasserting itself. "I can manage. Just perhaps wait nearby?" I nodded, stepping back to allow her privacy, but remaining close enough to hear if she called out. A few minutes later, the door opened, and Elaine emerged looking even more exhausted than before. "Let's get you back to bed," I said gently, supporting her as we moved slowly back to the bedroom. Once she was settled, I checked the time. It was nearly 10 p.m., and I realized we'd missed her scheduled pain medication. I went downstairs to retrieve it, along with a fresh glass of water. When I returned, Elaine was lying with her eyes closed, but she opened them as I approached the bed. "I think I should stay in here tonight," I said, nodding toward the chaise lounge by the window. "Just in case you need anything." She started to protest, then seemed to reconsider. "If you're sure you don't mind?" "I don't mind." I handed her the medication and water. "This will help with the pain so you can sleep." As she took the pills, I noticed her hand trembling slightly. The vulnerability she was showing, allowing me to see her weakness, accepting my help without the usual barriers of pride and propriety, struck me as more significant than any apology she could have offered for her past treatment of me. "I'll just get some things from the guest room to make up the chaise," I said, turning toward the door. "Rebecca?" Her voice stopped me. "There's something I need to tell you about our situation." I turned back, feeling a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You don't have to explain anything to me, Elaine." "I know." She adjusted herself against the pillows, wincing slightly. "But I want to. I need to, actually." She took a deep breath. "Robert isn't in Singapore for business. He's gone." "Gone?" I repeated, not understanding. "What do you mean, gone?" "He left 3 weeks ago, said he needed to sort things out, took what was left in our joint account and disappeared." Her voice was matter of fact, but I could hear the undercurrent of humiliation beneath the surface. "The last I heard, he was in Singapore, but that was a week ago. He isn't answering my calls now." I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, trying to process this information. Robert Wilson, pillar of the community, successful financial advisor, patriarch of the perfect family, had abandoned his wife in the midst of their financial crisis. "Elaine, I don't know what to say." "There's nothing to say." Her lips pressed into a thin line. 38 years of marriage, and when things get difficult, he runs away. She looked down at her hands, one encased in the white cast. "The truth is, Rebecca, I'm not just in financial trouble. I'm destitute. The house is in foreclosure. The cars will be repossessed next week. Robert cleaned out what was left of our accounts before he left. The magnitude of her situation hit me like a physical blow. I had assumed the Wilsons were facing setbacks, maybe downsizing, perhaps some embarrassment in their social circle. But this was catastrophic. Total financial ruin, coupled with abandonment by her husband. "Does Daniel know?" I asked finally. She shook her head. "No one knows the full extent of it. Olivia suspects something is wrong, but she's on her honeymoon. And Daniel." She sighed. "Robert always protected him from the realities of money. He has no idea how bad things are." "But you have to tell him," I insisted. "He needs to know, Elaine." "I know." She looked suddenly exhausted, the weight of her secrets visibly pressing down on her. "I will. Tomorrow. When he comes, Her voice caught. "I needed to tell someone, and somehow you were the one I wanted to tell." The admission hung in the air between us, laden with implications neither of us was ready to fully examine. That Elaine Wilson, who had spent years judging me and finding me wanting, now turned to me in her darkest hour. It defied all the patterns of our previous relationship. "Thank you for trusting me with this," I said finally, not knowing what else to offer. Elaine nodded, her eyes drifting closed. The medication was taking effect, drawing her toward sleep. "You always did see more clearly than the rest of us," she murmured, her voice fading. "You saw right through our perfect facade from the beginning." Her breathing deepened as she slipped into sleep, leaving me to ponder her words. Had I seen through the Wilsons' facade? Perhaps in some ways. I had certainly felt like an outsider in their world of carefully maintained appearances. But I had never imagined that the foundation of that world was so fragile, so close to complete collapse. I watched Elaine sleep for a while, noting how vulnerable she looked without the armor of her usual composure. Then I went to the guest room to gather what I needed for the night, my mind racing with all I had learned. As I settled onto the chaise lounge in Elaine's room, a throw pillow tucked under my head and a blanket pulled up to my chin, I wondered what tomorrow would bring. Daniel would arrive, and Elaine would have to tell him the truth about their family's situation. And what would my role be then? Would I retreat back to my separate life, my business, my hard-won independence? Or was I already too entangled in the Wilsons' drama to simply walk away? The answer wasn't clear as I drifted toward sleep, but one thing was certain. The woman I had become in the 6 months since leaving the Wilson family was strong enough to handle whatever came next. And that knowledge, more than anything else, allowed me to finally close my eyes and rest. A sharp ray of morning sunlight pierced through a gap in the curtains, waking me from fitful sleep. For a moment, I was disoriented, confused by the unfamiliar surroundings until my eyes landed on Elaine's sleeping form in the bed. Reality rushed back. The hospital, the confession, my unexpected role as caretaker to my former mother-in-law. I checked my watch. Just past 7. I had woken every few hours during the night to check on Elaine as the doctor had instructed, making sure she could be roused, asking simple questions to assess her mental state. Each time she had been groggy, but coherent, and now she seemed to be sleeping peacefully. I slipped quietly from the room and headed downstairs, my body craving coffee. The kitchen was eerily quiet, the high-end appliances that had once intimidated me now looking like relics of a different era. I found the coffee and filters exactly where they had always been. Some habits remained, even in financial crisis. As the coffee brewed, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from Maya, a text from Tessa asking if I'd be in the shop today, and an email from a potential wholesale client interested in carrying our upcycled denim line. Normal life continuing, even as I stood in this surreal bubble of the past. I responded to Tessa, telling her I'd need her to manage the shop again today, offering overtime pay for the inconvenience. Then I texted Maya a brief update, promising more details later. The wholesale client would have to wait until I could give their inquiry the attention it deserved. You still take it with just a splash of milk, right? I turned to find Elaine standing in the doorway, her hair uncombed, wearing a silk robe over her nightgown. She looked better than she had the night before. Some color had returned to her face and she was steady on her feet despite the cast on her wrist. Yes, I said, surprised she remembered such a detail. Should you be up? The doctor said to rest. I've never been good at following orders, she said with a ghost of her old dryness. And I'm feeling much steadier this morning. I poured 2 cups of coffee, adding milk to mine and leaving hers black, a detail I had apparently also remembered from my years in the Wilson orbit. Thank you for checking on me through the night, she said, accepting the cup with her good hand. I was aware enough to know you were being very diligent. Just following doctor's orders, I demurred, uncomfortable with her gratitude. We sat at the kitchen island, an echo of countless mornings during my marriage when we had occupied the same space while maintaining careful emotional distance. But this morning was different, the air between us charged with her confession from the night before, the knowledge of Robert's abandonment hanging unspoken in the space between us. I meant what I said last night. Elaine finally broke the silence. About telling Daniel everything today. I nodded, stirring my coffee unnecessarily. He deserves to know. Yes, he does. She stared into her cup as if seeking answers in the dark liquid. Though I'm not sure he's equipped to handle it. Robert always shielded him from financial realities. Daniel has no idea how to manage actual hardship. The assessment was surprisingly clear-eyed coming from the woman who had participated in that sheltering, who had helped create a son unprepared for life's difficulties. He'll have to learn, I said more bluntly than I intended. We all do, eventually. Elaine's eyes met mine, a hint of her old sharpness returning. Like you did? When you left? Yes, I admitted. Exactly like that. It was terrifying at first, starting over, building something from nothing. But it was also freeing. To my surprise, Elaine nodded thoughtfully. I imagine it was. She turned her coffee cup slowly with her good hand. I've never been on my own, you know. I went from my parents' house to college where I met Robert in my sophomore year. We were married a week after graduation. A faint smile touched her lips. 40 years next month, or it would have been. The sadness in her voice was palpable, and I found myself feeling an unexpected empathy for this woman who had spent her entire adult life defining herself through her role as Robert Wilson's wife. I'm sorry, I said, meaning it. Whatever my issues with Elaine, no one deserved to be abandoned after decades of marriage. She straightened her shoulders, composure reasserting itself. Well, self-pity won't solve anything. I need to make some decisions, practical decisions, about what comes next. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang, an insistent, repeated pressing that could only be Daniel. Elaine closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength, then nodded toward the door. Would you mind? I'd rather he didn't see me like this right away. I hesitated, then stood. I'll send him up so you can get dressed. Daniel was mid-ring when I opened the door, his finger poised over the bell, his expression cycling rapidly from impatience to shock to a complicated emotion I couldn't quite identify. Becca, he said, my name awkward on his lips after months of legal document formality. I didn't realize you'd still be here. He looked the same, yet somehow different. The same carefully styled dark hair, the same expensive watch peeking from the cuff of his dress shirt, the same tall, athletic build maintained by regular sessions with a personal trainer. But there was something new in his eyes, a wariness, Perhaps, or an uncertainty that hadn't been there during our marriage. I stayed overnight to monitor your mother because of the concussion, I explained, stepping back to let him in. She's upstairs getting dressed. She's doing better this morning. He hovered in the foyer, seemingly unsure of his role now that I was there. Thank you for taking care of her. I should have been here. Yes, you should have, I agreed without heat. It was simply a fact, not an accusation. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration I remembered well from our marriage. I tried to get back last night, but there were no flights available. And then my phone died and I didn't have my charger. The excuses trailed off, both of us knowing they were inadequate. Daniel had always prioritized work over family emergencies, always found reasons why his presence wasn't essential. It had been a point of contention throughout our marriage. Now, it was simply an observation about his character. Your mother needs to talk to you, I said, changing the subject. It's important, Daniel. His expression shifted to concern. Is it about her health? The doctor said the concussion was mild. It's not about her health. I paused, not wanting to betray Elaine's confidence but feeling he needed some preparation. It's about your family's situation, financial situation. Confusion crossed his features. Financial situation? What are you talking about? Just listen to her, Daniel. Really listen. And try to remember that she's still recovering from a fall. Before he could press further, Elaine appeared at the top of the stairs, fully dressed in one of her typical outfits, tailored slacks, a silk blouse, minimal jewelry. Only the cast on her wrist and the faint bruising on her face revealed that anything was amiss. Daniel, she said, her voice steady. Thank you for coming. He moved to the base of the stairs, his concern evident. Mom, how are you feeling? Why didn't you call me right away when you fell? I tried, she said simply, descending the stairs with careful dignity. You were in meetings? The gentle rebuke seemed to land, Daniel's expression shifting to chagrin. I'm sorry. I should have checked my messages. Elaine reached the bottom of the stairs, accepting her son's careful hug with her good arm. It's all right. Rebecca has been very helpful. Daniel glanced my way, something like gratitude mixed with confusion in his eyes. I could read his thoughts as clearly as if he'd spoken them. Why would Becca help after everything? What does she want? The answer, of course, was nothing. I wanted nothing from the Wilsons, not anymore. My help had been freely given, no strings attached, no ulterior motives. It was perhaps the most honest interaction I'd had with this family since the day I met them. I should go, I said, retrieving my purse from where I'd left it on the entryway. A table. You two have a lot to talk about. Actually, Elaine said, surprising me, I'd prefer if you stayed, Rebecca. If you can spare the time. What I need to discuss affects Daniel's future, and by extension, the finalization of your divorce. You should hear it firsthand. I froze, caught between the desire to escape this family drama and the practical reality that Elaine was right. Whatever financial bomb she was about to drop would inevitably impact the divorce proceedings. Daniel looked from his mother to me, confusion deepening. What's going on? Why would our family's finances affect the divorce? We've already agreed on the terms. Let's sit down, Elaine said, gesturing toward the living room. This will take some explanation. We followed her into the formal living room, Daniel and I unconsciously taking our usual seats from family gatherings past. He in the leather armchair by the fireplace, me on the sofa near the window. Elaine remained standing, pacing slowly before the mantel, gathering her thoughts. Daniel, she began, her voice measured. There's no easy way to say this. Our family is in serious financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure. The investments are gone. The savings accounts are empty. Daniel blinked, clearly not processing her words. What are you talking about? Dad's business is doing well. You just renovated the lake house last year. The lake house has been sold, Elaine corrected gently. 3 months ago. And your father's business has been struggling for years. He's been borrowing against our assets, making increasingly risky investments trying to recover losses. That doesn't make sense, Daniel insisted, looking to me as if I might contradict his mother. Dad is one of the top financial advisors in Portland. His client list includes half the city's executives. Image versus reality, Elaine said softly, echoing her words from the hospital. Your father maintained the appearance of success long. After the reality had changed, he was very good at that. We both were. Daniel stood abruptly, moving to the window, his back to us. Where is Dad? He should be the one explaining this. Elaine's composure faltered for the first time. Your father left, Daniel, 3 weeks ago. He took what was left of our liquid assets and disappeared. The last I heard from him, he was in Singapore, but he stopped answering my calls. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched Daniel's shoulders tense, his hands clench at his sides as he absorbed this information. Not just financial ruin, but abandonment by the father he had idolized his entire life. This can't be happening, he said finally, his voice barely audible. There has to be some explanation. Dad wouldn't just leave. I wish there were another explanation, Elaine said, but the facts are what they are. The house goes to auction in 3 weeks unless we can somehow produce a payment of $127,000 to cover the arrears and penalties. The cars will be repossessed. Next week, the credit cards are maxed out, and the collection agencies have started calling. Daniel turned, his face pale with shock. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I could have helped. I have savings. Your savings wouldn't make a dent in this, Daniel. Elaine's voice was gentle but firm. We're talking about millions in debt. Your father was pulling money from one investment to cover losses in another, borrowing against properties that were already underwater. It's a house of cards that's been collapsing for years. I sat quietly, watching this family drama unfold, feeling simultaneously like an intruder and like an essential witness. The pieces were falling into place. Elaine's obsession with appearances, the constant pressure on Daniel to project success, even her treatment of me as somehow inadequate for their family. It had all been a desperate attempt to maintain a facade that was crumbling from within. And this is why you wanted Becca here? Daniel asked suddenly, turning his attention to me. Because our prenup is based on family assets that don't exist anymore. Partially, Elaine admitted. The divorce settlement may need to be reconsidered in light of these circumstances. But more importantly, Rebecca has shown herself to be clear-eyed about situations that the rest of us have been blind to. I thought her perspective might be valuable. The compliment, for that's what it was, however backhandedly delivered, caught me by surprise. Elaine Wilson acknowledging that I might see things more clearly than her precious family. It was unprecedented. I don't understand what you expect me to do, Daniel said, running his hands through his hair again, disheveling the careful styling. I can't fix this. I don't have that kind of money. I don't expect you to fix it, Elaine said, sinking onto the sofa, suddenly looking every year of her age. I just needed you to know the truth. I'm going to lose this house, Daniel. I'm going to lose everything. And I need to start making plans for what comes next. The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord in me. Despite everything, despite the years of judgment and criticism, despite the way she had undermined my marriage at every turn, I couldn't help but feel compassion for this proud woman facing the complete dismantling of her life. What are you thinking? I asked, breaking my silence. About what comes next, I mean. Elaine looked at me, a hint of surprise in her expression, as if she'd forgotten I was there. I'm not sure yet. I have a sister in Phoenix who might let me stay with her temporarily. Or there's a small retirement community in Salem that's relatively affordable. The options sounded bleak. Charity from a sibling or a dramatically downsized life in a budget retirement facility. Neither seemed to fit the Elaine Wilson I had known, the woman who had ruled Lake Oswego society with impeccable taste and relentless standards. "You can stay with me," Daniel said suddenly, decisively. "My condo has a guest room. It's not what you're used to, but—" "That's very kind, Daniel," Elaine interrupted gently. "But I don't think that's the right solution. You're establishing your independence, building your career. The last thing you need is your mother living in your spare room." "She's right," I found myself saying, surprising all three of us. "That's not a sustainable long-term plan." Daniel shot me an annoyed glance. "I'm not going to abandon my mother when she needs help. Unlike some people, I believe in standing by family." The barb stung, even though I understood it came from a place of shock and hurt. "That's not what I meant. Of course you should help your mother. But moving her into your condo is a band-aid, not a solution. She needs to rebuild, not just survive." Elaine was watching me with an odd expression, a mixture of curiosity and something that looked almost like hope. "What would you suggest, Rebecca?" It was a genuine question, not the rhetorical setup for criticism that had characterized most of Elaine's inquiries during my marriage. She was actually asking for my perspective, valuing my input in a way she never had before. I hesitated, aware that I was stepping deeper into their family crisis when I should be maintaining my hard-won distance. But the words came anyway, propelled by a combination of practical thinking and unexpected empathy. "You need income," I said simply. "Not just a place to stay, but a way to support yourself going forward. Do you have any marketable skills?" Daniel made a sound of protest at the bluntness of my question, but Elaine held up her hand to silence him. "It's a fair question," she said. "And the answer is, not really. I have a degree in art history that I've never used. I've been a homemaker and community volunteer for 40 years. My skills are in organizing charity galas and managing household staff, not exactly in high demand in today's job market." "What about your network?" I pressed. "You know everyone in Portland society. There must be connections you could leverage." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Those connections are already disintegrating as word of our situation spreads. You'd be amazed how quickly invitations dry up when people realize you can't reciprocate or donate to their causes." I nodded, understanding. The social circles Elaine had navigated so skillfully were based on mutual benefit and appearances. Once those were gone, so was the network. "Then you need to start fresh," I said. "Build something new that isn't dependent on your old life." Daniel was pacing now, agitation evident in every movement. "This is absurd. We're talking as if Dad isn't coming back, as if there's no chance of recovering any of the money. We should be focusing on finding him, on understanding what happened to the investments." "Your father isn't coming back," Elaine said with quiet certainty. "At least not in any way that will solve this situation. This isn't a temporary setback, Daniel. It's a complete collapse." The finality in her voice seemed to reach him, his pacing slowing, his shoulders slumping in defeat. For the first time, I saw Daniel Wilson without the shield of privilege and expectation that had defined him throughout our marriage. He looked lost, vulnerable in a way I had never witnessed before. "I don't know how to help you," he admitted, his voice small. "I don't know what to do." "None of us does," Elaine said gently. "That's why we're talking it through, together." The inclusiveness of her statement, the we that encompassed me as well as Daniel, was jarring. I had never been part of the Wilson family's decision-making process, had always been kept at a careful distance from their inner workings. Now, suddenly, I was being invited into the most intimate kind of family discussion. "I should go," I said, standing abruptly. "You two need time to process this together, and I have a business to run." "Of course," Elaine said, rising as well. "You've already done more than enough, Rebecca. Thank you for everything. The sincerity in her voice gave me pause. The Elaine Wilson I had known during my marriage had never thanked me with such genuine appreciation, had never acknowledged any contribution I made as valuable. Daniel looked torn, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, he managed, "I'll walk you out." We moved to the foyer in awkward silence, the weight of all that had been revealed pressing down on us. At the door, Daniel hesitated, then said, "Thank you for helping my mother. I know you had no obligation to do that." "It wasn't about obligation," I said truthfully. "It was about being the kind of person I want to be." He nodded, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "You've changed," he observed. "Yes," I agreed. "I have." As I turned to leave, he called after me. "Becca, would you consider helping us figure this out? You've always been good with practical solutions, and right now we could use that." The request caught me off guard. Daniel Wilson asking for my help, acknowledging my strengths. It was as unexpected as Elaine's gratitude had been. "I'll think about it," I said after a moment. "But Daniel, you need to understand something. If I help, it won't be to save your family's social standing or to preserve appearances. It will be to help your mother build something real, something sustainable for her future." He nodded slowly. "I understand. That's actually what I want too, for her to be okay." As I drove away from the Wilson home, I felt strangely peaceful despite the emotional intensity of the morning. For years, I had sought validation from this family, had tried to prove my worth to people who measured value in ways that were fundamentally different from my own. Now, in their moment of crisis, they were turning to me, not because I had finally earned their approval, but because I had stopped needing it. The realization was powerful. In walking away from my marriage, in building my business from scratch, in creating a life that aligned with my true values, I had become someone stronger, clearer, more authentic than the woman who had once desperately tried to fit into the Wilson mold. And perhaps that woman, this new version of me, could offer something valuable to Elaine as she faced her own journey of reinvention. Not out of obligation or guilt or a desire to return to the past, but as one independent person reaching out to another in a moment of need. The sun was high overhead by the time I reached my shop, the day already half gone but somehow feeling like the beginning of something new. I wasn't sure yet what role, if any, I would play in the Wilsons' crisis. But I was certain of one thing. Whatever choice I made would be from a position of strength, not weakness. From a place of giving freely, not seeking approval. And that certainty, that hard-won clarity about my own worth, was perhaps the most valuable thing I had built in the month since walking away from a life that had never truly been mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.